Okay, I'm gonna be talking about Lost in Space. That is, the original one, not the Netflix remake. And I thought I'd focus a bit on the way the show was received by both the critics and the viewers. So let's go. The 1960s TV show Lost in Space was first aired on September the 15th in 1965, and it received a really mixed reception from both the critics and the audiences of that time. Some of the critics praised the show for what they described as a unique blend of science fiction and family-friendly adventure, while other critics downright slammed it for having campy acting and cheesy special effects. So, one of the biggest critics of the show was someone who worked for the New York Times, a critic by the name of Jack Gould. He basically said in his review that the show was a curiously uninspired and overly complicated science fiction series. Gould criticized the show's writing, acting, and direction, calling it a disappointing and overly ambitious effort. Gould, a TV critic for that paper, the New York Times, wrote the review in September 1965. Here's the full transcript of his review. Lost in Space, the new science fiction series on CBS, is a disappointing and overly ambitious effort. The show, which premiered last night, is a curiously uninspired and overly complicated science fiction series that fails to live up to its potential. The premise of the show is intriguing enough. The Robinson family, a group of space colonists, is on a mission to establish a new colony on a distant planet. However, their spacecraft encounters a meteor storm and is forced to crash land on an uncharted planet. The family, along with their robot, must now survive on this hostile planet until they can be rescued. The show's biggest problem is its lack of focus. The writers seem to have tried to cram too many ideas into each episode, resulting in a disjointed and confusing storyline. The characters are also poorly developed, with little depth or complexity. The acting is generally poor, with the exception of Jonathan Harris, who plays the villainous Dr. Smith. The show's special effects are also subpar, with cheap-looking sets and unconvincing spacecraft. The robot, which is supposed to be one of the show's main attractions, is a disappointment, with stiff and awkward movements. Overall, Lost in Space is a show that fails to deliver on its promise of exciting science fiction adventure. With its poor writing, weak acting, and subpar special effects, it is a disappointing effort that is unlikely to appeal to fans of the genre. On the other hand, the show's creator, Irwin, defended the show in an interview with the press, saying that it was a family show that the whole family can enjoy and that it was not just for kids. Allen also emphasized the show's educational value, pointing out that it was designed to teach science and technology to young audiences. This is what Variety said in its September 15, 1965 edition. Lost in Space, the new science fiction series on CBS, is a disappointing and overly ambitious effort. The show, which premiered last night, is marred by poor writing, weak acting, and unconvincing special effects. The premise of the show, in which a family of space colonists is stranded on an uncharted planet, is intriguing enough, but the execution falls flat. The characters are poorly developed and the acting is generally poor. The special effects, which are supposed to be one of the show's main attractions, are subpar. Overall, Lost in Space is a disappointing effort that is unlikely to appeal to fans of the genre. The New York Herald Tribune, September 16, 1965. Lost in Space, the new science fiction series on CBS, is a mixed bag of intriguing ideas and disappointing execution. The show, which premiered last night, has an interesting premise, with a family of space colonists stranded on an uncharted planet. However, the writing is often clunky and the acting is uneven. The special effects, while not as bad as some of the other shows of its kind, are still not up to par. Overall, Lost in Space is a show that could have been great, but falls short of its potential. The Los Angeles Times, September 17, 1965. Lost in Space, the new science fiction series on CBS, is a show that is both fascinating and frustrating. The premise of the show, in which a family of space colonists is stranded on an uncharted planet, is intriguing enough, and there are some interesting ideas and concepts throughout the show. However, the writing is often clumsy and the acting is uneven. The special effects, while not as bad as some of the other shows of its kind, are still not up to par. Overall, Lost in Space is a show that has the potential to be great, but falls short of its potential due to its poor execution. Okay, so here's a bunch of positive reviews. Variety, September 15, 1965, a colorful, fast-paced space adventure. Irwin Allen, the series producer, has cleverly mixed science fiction with family drama, and the result is a show that has something for everyone. New York Daily News, September 16, 1965, a sprightly, imaginative science fiction yarn for the whole family. Special effects are first-rate. The Robinson family is an attractive, wholesome bunch. Los Angeles Times, September 17, 1965. Lost in Space has all the ingredients for a top-flight juvenile adventure series. Exciting, well-produced, and suspenseful. Some critics' reviews swayed both ways, positive and negative. Here are some. San Francisco Chronicle, September 16, 1965. Lost in Space isn't bad, but it isn't great either. It's a predictable adventure yarn with some good special effects and a likable cast. Chicago Tribune, September 18, 1965. Lost in Space has its moments of excitement, but the scripts are often trite and the characters one-dimensional. Still, it might keep the kids entertained. John Crosby, syndicated columnist. Lost in Space has all the earmarks of a quickie production. The sets are flimsy, the writing is hokey, and the characters are stereotypes. And columnist Dorothy Parker wrote, Lost in Space? I found it in the living room, but I'm still looking for some sense in it. After the show's premiere, Irwin Allen, the creator and producer of Lost in Space, did an interview with the press where he defended the show. Here's a transcript of his defense of the show. I think Lost in Space is a great show. It's a show that's full of adventure, excitement, and family values. The premise of the show is simple. A family of space colonists is stranded on an uncharted planet, and they have to survive and find a way back home. It's a classic story of survival and exploration, and I think it's something that audiences will really respond to. I know that some critics have been negative about the show, but I think they're missing the point. This show is not about the special effects or the science fiction elements. It's about the characters and their relationships. The Robinsons are a family, and they have to work together to survive. They have to rely on each other and support each other, and that's something that audiences can relate to. I also think that the show's setting, a futuristic space colony, allows us to explore some really interesting themes and ideas. We can talk about the dangers of technology and the importance of human connection, and we can do it in a way that's fun and entertaining. So, I think Lost in Space is a great show, and I hope that audiences will give it a chance. It's not perfect, but it's a show that's full of heart and adventure, and I think it's worth watching. Okay. So basically, the type of praise Lost in Space received was largely for its family-friendly appeal, exciting adventures, and special effects. However, there were those other critics that did not like the show at all. They said the writing was predictable and the characters were stereotypical. But that said, the show had what some described as a campy charm and a willingness to embrace its pulpy sci-fi roots, which seemed to endear it to many viewers, even if it wasn't universally applauded for any kind of highbrow artistic merit. Despite all of that mixed reception, Lost in Space was renewed for a second season. The show continued to air for 3 seasons until its cancellation in 1968. In the years since its original broadcast, Lost in Space has become something of a cult classic and, interestingly enough, has been reevaluated by both critics and audiences alike. Many people now appreciate the show's campy charm as well as its influence on the science fiction genre as a whole. The show also gets praised for its exploration of stuff such as family life and courage. So overall, while Lost in Space received a lot of mixed reception at the time of its original broadcast, it has, to this day, still retained a devoted fanbase.